an insane imbalance. It's wild.
I was thinking as well. You mentioned it very briefly in Seaspiracy, but it really piqued my interest. So now I've got you guys to talk about it. But you mentioned it briefly about the Mitsubishi company and the tuna industry, and it comes up as a slogan on the screen about how they are controlling the frozen tuna that they have to control the market. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I found that really interesting, how they actually have more than enough tuna already killed, but they're keeping it in storage and freezing it so they can actually keep the prices of bluefin tuna high, because it's a delicacy. Because when people eat at a sushi place or something, bluefin tuna, wow, it's on the menu. And that's in order to keep that profit high. They are controlling the amount of tuna that they're releasing to the market. So they've actually overcaught and frozen it all.
I think there's a name for this. It's like the economics of extinction. They're invested in extinction because it drives the price up. So they have a vested interest in this fish going extinct because they're storing all of the frozen.
Ultimate scarcity drives the prices up. And they have something like, last I heard, it was like 10 years or more supply of bluefin tuna, which is the most endangered Pacific bluefin tuna, in their warehouses, frozen, ready to be taken out in 10 years, and eating a 10-year-old fish that's been dead for 10 years. But it'll cost you, $1 million to buy this fish.
I mean, the most expensive bluefin, what was it, over $3 million?
Yeah.
So
it's
big bucks.
What?
Yeah.
What is this? Who is eating this stuff, and why are they paying that much? This is weird.
I believe the guy that bought it, he buys it every year, and he's always setting a new record. So I'm sure the next year's one will be even higher. But it's a guy that in Japan who owns, I think, a branch of seafood restaurants, and it's like a promotional thing. And I think last I heard it was $3.1 million for a fish. And it's so funny because I was on a call with Dr. Sylvia Earle the other day, and she said, I think it was in the 90s or in the 80s, she remembers telling her colleagues that, one day the last bluefin tuna will sell for $1 million. And here we are, not even to the end yet, and it's reached $3 million. It's going to get silly money by the time these animals go extinct, if it continues.
Some of these fishing companies are like economic hitmen in a way. They're controlling it so they can control the markets. You hear about it in countries where people kill crops, and so a certain like quinoa cannot be made there anymore, so they can control the market in another country. But the same thing's going on in the ocean as well.
But that's a really interesting way you phrase that, Clive, because I was going out of my head with frustration about this, and I was going, well, they're all these bad guys, but really we have control as consumers. So this guy's buying this $3 million fish, but who is then paying his restaurant? Who's going to sit down and pay to eat this stuff? So we do have the power. The people who are eating at these restaurants, are they seeing your documentary? How are you getting the message to the consumers?
Well, that's a good question.
We had a really strong consumer message in it. So,
it's as I said, we've had such a huge response from Japan, and so who knows? Maybe some of these corporate businessmen who go in and eat this very expensive fish, or maybe watching our film. But it does come down to it, and people have said that. That was a downfall of the film, that we so-called only focused on the consumer thing, but we actually had other messages for government as well to end subsidies, which we can get into, and also create marine protected areas. Worldwide right now, all the global governments are putting somewhere in the region of $35 billion into the fishing industry as subsidies. That's our taxpayer money going to support the most destructive industry in our oceans, to maximize more capture of fish, increase boat sizes, pay for fuel, pay for fishing licenses, pay for these boats to go to these developing regions and steal the fish from there, when that money could be repurposed. The United Nations state that $30 billion, less than that, is needed to solve world hunger. It's an outrage that this is allowed to continue.
Well, it could be directed in it could go towards protecting the ocean rather than paying the industry to sort of pillage it.
But the thing is, it's all the government action in the world isn't going to create a necessary shift unless we've also got people doing it voluntarily. You don't want a top-down system that's forcing you can't eat this anymore. I think it's got to come from within us and from our own consciousness, to realize these things and actually make a personal choice.
Well, government often follows the people, so people have got to make they've got to get to a critical mass and shift enough, and then the government eventually hopefully will respond.
And that's why we've got a petition out there as well.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the petition?
Yeah, so we launched a petition, was it 2 weeks ago now, and it's reached over 500,000 signatures. And this is to protect 30% of our oceans by the year 2030 from industrial fishing. Worldwide, the average area of sea that's being protected as a no-take zone, as a marine sanctuary against fishing, is less than 1%. It's like less than 0.5%, I believe. That's the same for many countries as well. Like if you just take Brazil's coastline or New Zealand's coastline or the UK's coastline, it's usually in the region of less than 1% is actually protected from the fishing industry. So this is a starting point where we can say, okay, let's just create 30% at least as a marine protected zone. And it's been really successful, the petition, and people are coming on board, and it's going really, really well. And we're going to be delivering those signatures to local governments in different areas of the world and speaking to media about it. But, time is of the essence, really. That's what the film has shown. We don't have another 30 years to eventually get around to this. This is something that's got to happen yesterday, and people are recognizing that now. So
it's happening quite faster and faster and faster. I'm even if I go back to scuba diving, it's some of the places I've scuba dived and I've been there, and it's just abundant with beauty, and the coral is beautiful, and there's sharks everywhere, and you go back 3 years later, and you're like, what happened?
Yes.
Yeah.
The coral is white and bleached. There's you're lucky to see one hammerhead shark on a dive when you used to see probably 6 or 7 on every single dive.
That's really stark if you go to the Great Barrier Reef. I don't know if you've been there before, but it's really there's a huge difference to how it was even just like 5 years ago. And then I know that further up the coast, they've got more of a jellyfish problem up there, and this is slowly coming like down the coast as the waters change.
But this is an interesting thing. So there's huge regions of the world, or even in the Mediterranean, where tourist beaches are actually being closed off now because of an influx of jellyfish. Now, the reason why we're seeing an influx of jellyfish is because we've wiped out all the predators. We've wiped out the turtles, we've wiped out the fish that would otherwise predate on them, and now we're getting these huge jellyfish blooms, and we've basically decapitated our food ecosystems in the ocean. We've got rid of all the sharks, the turtles, the dolphins in so many areas of the sea, and we've also bottom trawled the ocean floor and taken away those habitats for fish, those nurseries for fish, and the fish themselves. And about the only thing that's left is jellyfish.
I can tell you, I have been stung by a lion's mane jellyfish. I was swimming in the Irish Sea. They're not even meant to be in Ireland when we were on Vikings. I was swimming in my boxer shorts, and this ginormous kind of pizza thing came, and I saw it, and it grazed my leg, and I turned over in the wave to try and get away from it. Went across my upper thighs and my belly, and I pushed away at it because it was my natural reaction. It went on my arm, and I was in the freezing cold Irish Sea. And when I got out of the sea, it's my body temperature started warming up, because I was already, like I said, because my daughter was going to get in the water as well. I was like, no, Dad needs to go home. Dad's been stung by a jellyfish. It's fine. I was trying to play down the pain. But as my body started to warm up into to go back to normal, it felt like someone had put me onto a flaming pyre or something. I was sort of set fire. The legs, I couldn't even put my foot on the gas properly in the car because my legs were shivering so much. Whole day, trying to put ice in it. They say pee on a jellyfish sting. Doesn't work. I was in the shower, like peeing, trying to pat my pee all over my body. I was in agony. I literally got to the point where people
you needed Quinthworth.
Yeah, I needed Quinthworth to pee on me. I got to the point where I was in that darkened room, and I was trying to just sleep, and someone would knock on the door and go, "Hey, do you need anything?" I was like, because I didn't want to think. It was horrible. So there you go. If you don't want to get stung by a jellyfish.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
I've been stung in Australia, but it
Oh, you're Australian. You're going to be like, yeah, it was nothing.
Yeah.
I really was nothing. It must have been.
That sounds nasty, though. But that's the thing. That's the thing. It's like I don't want to swim in the ocean that are just going to be abundant with jellyfish, and that's one of the knock-on effects that we don't realize of all this fishing is that we're going to see more of that happening, especially in Ireland right now. Ireland in 1991 declared all Irish waters to be a sanctuary for dolphins and whales. But guess what? They didn't stop the fishing. And that's the leading threat to the dolphins and whales there. There's these huge mega trawlers operating in Ireland just recently. I don't know if it's this week or last week was happening. And they're mid-water trawls, which is the zone where all the dolphins and whales go. And lots of dolphins and whales are washing up on Irish beaches. And this is meant to be a dolphin and whale sanctuary, and it's happening all the time. So there's a huge amount of fishing happening there. And yeah, who knows? Maybe that's one of the consequences, more jellyfish happening in waters where there shouldn't be.
Well, that's the one thing that made sense to my little 10-year-old son. He was watching Seaspiracy, and it really, we'll talk about it later, but it really affected him in Thailand. It really, really upset him. He couldn't understand how slaves would be taken on board to fish. But the one thing that made sense to him was when You just made it so simple and said, well, all these apex predators, and they've got, they're going to eat all the medium-sized fish, and then if all these apex predators are wiped out by us, then the medium fish eat the smaller fish, and then there's no smaller fish, and then the medium fish die out because there's nothing for them to eat, and then eventually has a knock-on effect all the way down. And that is the one thing my 10-year-old took away from it, and now he doesn't want to eat fish. He did eat fish, didn't like fish anyway, to be honest, but he doesn't want to eat fish ever again. And that was it. That message just made it for him.
That's great to hear.
So you're getting through to different generations as well, and I think there's something in this documentary for everybody. I really strongly recommend people sit and watch it with their families.
I think another thing too, because some people, they get veganism or vegetarianism. It's a hot topic. It's a controversial topic for a lot of people. But, even if you can't relate to that, I was really struck by the human trafficking element. I had no idea, stupidly, naively, that was such a huge part of this problem. And it, you can't, if you want to be heartless because you don't think fish feel anything, fine. But you're looking at your fellow human beings who are just in these horrific conditions for months and months and months, and then thrown overboard with no consequence.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's been reported in 47 countries.
Yeah, 47 countries. This isn't just local to Thailand. This is something that's happening. So, Lucy mentioned the economics of extinction. We're also having the economics of slavery come into this. So what's happening is, especially around the Thai waters, is because of the depletion of fish, these boats are having to stay out at sea longer and longer and working harder and catching fewer fish. And what this has meant is, the captain still has his bottom line, and he still has to pay the bills. He still has to pay for the boat, the fuel, everything else. Where are you going to cut your costs? The workers. And so you have migrant workers coming into Thailand from neighboring countries looking for jobs. They get tricked and kidnapped to come into these boats. Hey, you'll make loads of money, come on board. Before you know it, they're out at sea for 10 years. They haven't seen family. And they're being abused daily, regularly. They can't eat when they want, sleep when they want. They can't speak to one another. It's just complete torture. And so much of the stuff that we weren't able to squeeze into the film, there were stories of captains actually offloading their crew onto these sort of sandbank islands, basically like desert islands, putting them in cages, taking the boat back to shore, offload the fish, come back and get them again, just so they wouldn't be able to run away.
What?
This is happening, yeah. Other stories
Yeah, like when they'd come back in and then they'd escape from the boat and they'd go to the local police station. And because this corruption goes all the way up to the top, the policeman would often
kidnap them
sell them back.
Or sell them back to the slave ships, or have him work as a slave on his own farm, the policeman. These are other stories that are happening, and repeated promises and claims from the industry that, we've cleaned up our act, this doesn't happen anymore. And then a few months later, an investigation happens and you realize it's just as prolific as it was. So this is something, and not just that, we also talk about these fisheries observers that go on these vessels in order to monitor the fishing activities. And not to mention, we've been on a boat where there was a fisheries observer, and the crew do not like the fisheries observer. They're there to basically keep an eye on them, and you don't want that. It's very hostile, and they are abused, and they get bribed, and they're not able to do their job properly because of the social pressures a lot of the time, and even thrown overboard and killed.
Yeah, well, I imagine that's a process, right? As well, you get offered a bribe, you turn it down, get thrown overboard. Yeah.
Yeah, I also think it's just so terrible because this is all happening so far out at sea. There's no way to really monitor it. There are regulations on paper, and there's no way to enforce it because it's all happening so far off the coast. And there's no way out for these people. The one way out is overboard. It's just so hard to regulate, so hard to know. You kind of foresee this stuff failing observers. It's so easy to cut corners and cut on labour costs and cut on human rights and that kind of thing. So I think that's always going to be, we're not going to be able to eradicate that while we're still doing fishing, like industrial fishing.
Tell us about you guys, though. When you went over to Thailand, and do you have a fixer? How did you track down some of these guys who gave their accounts of what happened as slaves and things? And obviously it amounts, when you watch the documentary, amounts to someone has reported you and the police are on their way and you need to move before you get arrested. And there's a lot at stake for these guys that you're interviewing as well. Tell us how that came about and how you got these contacts.
Yeah, so in typical fashion, we sort of arrived in Thailand without a plan. And what was a crazy story is just before we arrived in Thailand, there was a story of another funnily enough, British couple, filmmakers, who were there to film the piracy issues in the region of south of Thailand.